right, ground down the studs. We just took as much off, or as little off as we needed to. I didn't want to get too deep in there and gouge it and make the firewall any thinner it is. It's not that thick already. So yeah, we knocked off all of the stuff that we needed to. We were keeping this hole because we're gonna keep the heater in here. Also just the one throttle cable, so it's not gonna have cruise control. And then, so these are those flanges we got from ODB. They don't fit super tight, so instead of using these magnets, because the magnets don't really have much overhang on both sides, they're not really grabbing it that great. We got a couple of options. You can either use Clecos, these little Cleco boys. We could use these with washers on the other side. Put them through, tighten them up, it'll grab the washer. It expands and grabs the washer, and that would hold them in just fine. In aviation, these are like extremely common, super normal. Or there's the spring action ones. We could use these little springy boys. Put a 1/8 inch washer on the other side. Grab onto it. That would take 2 people to do that. It's just me right now, so probably use these boys. These are sheet metal clamps. They're literally for doing exactly what we're doing right now, so might as well put them to work. They won't work in the sections like these round guys right there. There's enough gap for them, but they need a pretty long slot to fit in. So ones like this, we should be able to get the slot on both sides. We'll probably push it to the top, tack the top, slide them to the bottom, tack the centers, yank them out, fill it in. We can use them on these guys too, since they have flat sides, and this one's gonna have a flat side, so should be no problem to just use these bad boys on those. On these, I might use Clecos with washers, or just try it with the magnets and send it. The heat from the welding will probably ruin the magnet, so I guess we'll find out. Send it. All right, I ended up going with a mixture of Clecos and the sheet metal clamps. So on the flat spots, I could use the sheet metal clamps. They're nice and flat, flush. Get a nice smooth transition. So on these bigger ones, kind of going above and beyond to make sure they're flat, so I don't have to fill that whole thing with a bunch of body filler. If I can just get a nice smooth surface off the get-go. These corners kind of popped up and down, so I end up just drilling 1/8 inch holes, throwing a Cleco in there just to hold those. Spring-loaded Clecos aren't very great for tacking, since it's when the metal cools and shrinks, it'll push the spring in just as easy. But the finger tighten ones, they're really easy to over tighten, and they end up pulling through this super thin sheet metal. Since there's no washer on the back side of them, they're just kind of helping holding it. So yeah, we're just gonna fire it in with a MIG gun. I have a 030 wire in there. I have some 024, but the drive rollers on this Miller machine doesn't push 024 that well. I have so many spooling issues with it. Better off just trying to make 030 work as best I can. Welding sheet metal's the worst. It's nothing like actual welding for strength or anything like that. So you have a piece of sheet metal. This is the gap we're trying to fill right there. You want to come in so the welding wire is coming in at the greatest angle you can into this side, so that as it melts, it's pushing down this way into the metal itself and bedding into the metal. And then you just fill it in with another one, fill it in with another one, fill it in with another one. Fill it that way, and then you have some back here, then enough here to grind off smooth when you've ground it all off. If you have a gap to fill and the welding wire is coming in this way, it's just going to want to melt and push right through it this way. So you want to come in at that steep angle and push it into itself so it builds up inside of itself. And just keep building it, building it, and building it. So coming in straight, you're just gonna blow holes right through it. So you need to come in at an angle, push the metal into the side, and that leaves you enough to grind off flat here and still have something on the back to grind smooth too. So let's do it.
So the body of these cars are made out of sheet metal, and that sheet metal is pressed between two dies and formed into the shape it's in. Now the metal itself already starts out with internal stresses. When they roll the steel into the thickness they want, it's usually hot, and it cools down from the exterior of the metal towards the center of the metal. So the outside shrinks before the inside shrinks, leaving an internal stress. So anything you do to the outside of the metal to relieve stress, then you will only have stress on one side of the material, making it move into that direction. So then they put it in between two presses and they form it into these shapes, which relieves stress in some spots, but not in other spots. So then you have new stresses where things just don't want to lay flat. So you got to be careful when you're either grinding on the exterior of the metal. If you release stress, it will warp. Or if you heat it up too much, it'll relieve stress and that will warp also. So it's just kind of a dance you got to do where you weld little pieces at a time, let it cool down, and then move on, weld another little piece. Instead of just dumping a ton of heat into one spot, you're spreading out the heat and keeping it from relieving stress anywhere. And that's kind of when you're looking at heat warpage, that's a lot of what's going on with the heat warpage. But the better you can do at this part of tacking everything really nice and filling it in, when you go to grind these welds down, you're less likely to find little tiny pinholes that you got to go back through and re-weld and re-grind down. And redoing one thing over and over and over again will just drive you insane. So the better you get at it, the more time you're going to save doing this dance. Then when you go, after you let it cool down, go at it with something really tough, like there's like a 60 grit grinding wheel, and then I'll go back over it with a small little hand grinder with a much finer grinding wheel on there, just to take a little bit at a time.
Alright, we got it nice and smooth and flat. Can't tell it was ever not there. It's since we got it so flush, once we grind it down the weld, I mean, it's not going to take any more than just some like high build primer to get rid of these tiny little pits that are in there. It's not worth re-welding in to try and hide them. They're just little dents. It'll fill in with primer, but it's like it was never there. Where the original wiring harness crosses through the firewall, and it has these big grommets on there. I'm just cutting out with a little air saber saw, and it makes quick work out. It just flies right off. The piece I originally got to fit in there probably isn't gonna fit, so I'll just use the hole as a template, and I'll cut another piece with this same little guy and weld it in there. Now with a little more light, I can kind of show where we're going with this step by step a little better. So it's just like a little scrap piece of 18 gauge, and I'm just using those little refrigerator magnets to hold it on to the firewall over the hole that I just cut. And I cut in that hole with this little saber saw. It's like a little air powered guy. It cuts sheet metal pretty quickly as long as it's got a new blade on it. So to make real quick work of that hole, it's pretty jagged, but we're gonna weld it anyway, so it kind of doesn't matter. So now I'm just gonna take my van, I'm gonna kind of just go around the edges just so I know about how big I need it. Doesn't matter if I get inside the hole, as long as I or like from my line's off, as long as it only goes to the very edge. Alright, now that I got that, I want to add an arrow. Just tell me that's the bottom of it. Alright, now to cut this little sucker out, this is just the old Milwaukee porta band. This one's battery powered, so I don't have to plug it in or nothing. I'm just gonna stand it up straight. It's leaning against my welding, or on my welding cart. And I'm gonna start out by taking the circle and I'm gonna do small relief lines all the way up to the circle.
Now you could go at this with a shear or some type of punch, a nibbler. There's so many options when it comes to cutting sheet metal. I like this one. It's just kind of a habit of mine. When I worked in the aviation industry, everything was made out of aluminum sheet metal, and any type of saw like this that actually removes the material doesn't work hard in the edge that you're cutting. So then you don't have to go back through and file the edges down and worry about stuff like that or cracking. It's not going to be a problem with the steel, but it's just kind of how I used to do things. So kind of just refer back to what I already know.
Now as I go around it, they'll kind of fall off, giving me room to make more round cuts with a straight blade.
Now these don't really need to be that accurate, so I mean this is already way overkill for this. If you had a big gap like those first pieces that we weld in, I mean you're just gonna fill it in with more weld and you're gonna grind it down. It's not the end of the world. I would err on cutting it too small. That way you just have more gap to fill in the wall, because if you go to try and fit this and it's a little too big, you're gonna have to come back over and cut a little out so it fits. So might as well just kind of err on making it too small. Even if there's big gaps, it's not that big of a deal. You can always put a piece of copper behind it if there's a huge gap, and the steel wire isn't going to stick to it.
I use this guy, little wheel on there, just kind of rounded off some of the sharp cut marks from the bandsaw, and just use the same little magnets, threw it in there. It's really not that hard. Once we grind it down, it's like it'll never be there. So I mean, definitely don't be scared to do any of this stuff. It's pretty easy once you get going, once you get a good repetitive speed going. But yeah, now I'm just gonna put little tack points between the magnets and then weld it in, grind it down, and then I just have to fill this one more hole there and grind that out. Grind down some of the rest of the garbage over there, and in this corner here, and then just start Scotch Brighten and making a good surface to throw some epoxy primer on and get that going. I might even weld in this hole here and make a completely different throttle cable setup at whatever length I want, instead of trying to find something else that suits it, you know. But that's where we're at so far. Just blasted a few tacks on there, but you can see there's a little bit of gaps, but for the most part it kind of pushes up flush against everything, and it's perfectly smooth transition between the two. So once we get some welds on there, I guess around here, this part is like punched kind of round, so it's got like a weird wave in it. It was already there when I was trying to get it to lay flat to trace it. I already kind of picked up on that, knew that was going to be a little issue, so might add a little extra weld there, see if I can just add some weld and grind it off and not have to do any filler or anything on there. But it just a couple tacks to hold it so that it don't totally kill the magnets. I'm kind of running out. As they get hot, they just get weaker and weaker. So yeah, now just gonna fully weld it, grind her down. Went on the KJ Magnetics website and I picked up these new magnets for holding these bad boys in. They're a little bit bigger. They're like a 3/8, so it gives you a little more hangover for really grabbing things on and making stuff flush. And they're also for high temperature, so as I'm welding, they're not losing their like ability to hold the piece in, so it's keeping it real flush and smooth. Got a bunch of them so I can kind of line a few up, tack a few in, and it's really speeding things up. The fact that you can keep on welding them without them dying like all these little guys hiding over here in the corner, and this little guy, they like barely hold on to it at all anymore. It's just like one of those little tiny refrigerator magnets now, the little black ones.